You're the man I want to marry. She said it before she even knew who picked up. Drunk, humiliated, and completely alone, Victoria Sterling, billionaire CEO, had just proposed to a stranger, a bus mechanic working the night shift who had no idea she existed. He didn't laugh. He didn't hang up. He just said quietly, "Ma'am, I think you called the wrong person." And somehow those 8 words would change both of their lives forever. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The limousine smelled like champagne and regret. Victoria Sterling sat with her back pressed against the leather seat, her heels off her hair falling loose from the updo that had cost $300 and 4 hours of her morning. Outside the tinted windows, Seattle slid by in wet streaks of neon and rain. She didn't look at it. She hadn't looked at anything all evening, not really. She had smiled, laughed on cue, shaken hands, accepted compliments. She had done everything a woman in her position was supposed to do at the Westbrook Capitol Gala, which was one of the most prestigious events in the Pacific Northwest. She had played the part so well that for a moment, standing at the podium, accepting an award for innovation leadership, she had almost believed it herself. Almost. It was when she stepped off that stage and turned around that the illusion cracked. Daniel was there, her fiancé, or the man everyone assumed was her fiancé, and he was leaning against the bar with another woman. Not in a way that was scandalous, not in a way she could point to and say, look at what he's doing. Just in a way that was comfortable, easy, like he belonged next to someone softer, someone who wasn't standing alone on a stage in front of 500 people accepting an award with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. He had looked up and caught her watching, and he had smiled. That was the worst part. He had smiled at her like she was a business acquaintance he was mildly happy to see. Not a woman. Not someone he loved. An asset. A familiar asset. Victoria had set her award on the nearest table, picked up her wrap, and walked out of that ballroom without saying a single word to anyone. Her assistant had run after her. Her publicist had texted 3 times before the elevator even arrived. She had ignored all of it, stepped into the limousine that was already waiting, and told the driver to just drive. Just drive. He was still driving. She didn't know how long she had been sitting there. Long enough that the champagne she'd been nursing all evening had settled into something warm and disorienting behind her eyes. Long enough that the tight knot of professionalism she kept strapped around her chest had loosened just slightly into something that felt dangerously close to grief. She picked up her phone. She wasn't sure why. Habit, maybe. Or the particular desperation of someone who suddenly cannot remember the last time they called someone, not because they needed something, but because they simply missed them. Her contacts list blurred slightly. She scrolled. Past her CFO. Past her attorneys. Past her assistant. Past names that belonged to calendars and boardrooms and quarterly projections. She kept scrolling, looking for something she couldn't name, and her finger slipped. The phone was already ringing before she realized what had happened. She looked at the screen. Ethan W. She frowned. She didn't know an Ethan W. The number looked familiar in the vague way that numbers look familiar when they've been in your phone long enough. For a moment she thought it might be a client, or someone from the board, or maybe someone her assistant had added without telling her. She should have hung up. She didn't hang up. The line clicked open, and before she could think, before the CEO part of her brain could organize a single coherent word, the lonely part of her, the part that had been sitting in the back of that limousine, swallowing champagne in silence for the better part of 2 hours, just opened its mouth. You're the man I want to marry. Dead silence. Not the polite silence of someone waiting for you to continue. Not even the confused silence of someone who thinks they misheard. This was a silence that had weight to it. A silence that seemed to be looking at her. Then the voice came. It was low, unhurried. The kind of voice that didn't seem to be performing anything at all. Ma'am, I think you called the wrong person. Victoria's brain returned to her body all at once. She sat up straight. The warm feeling behind her eyes evaporated in an instant, replaced by something cold and electric. Her mouth opened, closed. Her free hand grabbed the edge of the seat. She started. It's okay. the voice said. Still calm, completely almost insultingly calm. It happens. It does not happen, she said, and she wasn't sure why she said it, only that it came out before she could stop it. There was a pause. Then, to her absolute bewilderment, the man on the other end of the line made a sound that was almost not quite a laugh. Not a mocking laugh. Not the reflexive, polite chuckle of someone who works for her. Just a quiet, private amusement, like someone catching a joke between themselves and the universe. You're right, he said. It probably doesn't happen a lot. Victoria stood up in the limousine, which was physically difficult given the moving vehicle, and immediately sat back down. Her mind was cycling through 7 things simultaneously. Who was this person? How was his number in her phone? Had she really just said that out loud? Was he going to record this? Was this already on social media, and also unaccountably, why was his voice so steady? Who are you? She demanded. Who are you? He answered. Not rudely, just fairly. She opened her mouth. And she realized something that she had not realized in a very long time. She didn't want to answer that question with her title. She didn't want to say CEO. She didn't want to say Sterling Technologies. She didn't want to hand over the version of herself that lived on magazine covers and Wikipedia pages. Because whoever this man was, whatever wrong number she had somehow landed on, he didn't know any of that. She could hear it in his voice. The complete and total absence of recognition. The complete and total absence of performance. He was just a person, talking to another person. You still there? He asked. Yes, she said. I'm sorry. This was a mistake. I didn't mean to call you. I apologize. All right, he said simply. She stopped. Then for reasons she would analyze for a very long time afterward. Are you always this calm? Another pause. She could hear something in the background on his end. A rhythmic mechanical sound. Metal on metal. He was working. Whoever he was, it was nearly midnight, and he was working. Pretty much, he said. That must be nice, she said. And she hated how that came out. How much it sounded like the truth. She heard him stop what he was doing. Long night, he asked. Catastrophically long night. You okay? 3 words. Simple as water. And Victoria Sterling, who had been asked, Are you okay by lawyers, by publicists, by board members, by a fiancé who said the words the way he might ask about a quarterly report? None of it had ever made her throat tighten the way those 3 quiet words did from a complete stranger at midnight on the wrong phone call. I'm fine, she said, the way she always said it. Sure, he said. And she heard in that one syllable that he didn't believe her and that he wasn't going to push it, and that was somehow worse than being pushed. She pressed her lips together. I really am sorry, she said, for calling. I don't even know how your number is in my phone. It's all right. Good luck with your night. And then he was gone. Victoria sat in the limousine in the dark for a long time after that. The driver eventually asked if she had a destination. She gave him her home address. An address that corresponded to a penthouse on the 42nd floor with floor-to-ceiling views of the Sound, and a kitchen that had been designed by a chef she had once had a magazine profile written about. An address that felt as the car pulled up to it very large and very quiet. She did not sleep well that night. She told herself it was the champagne. The next morning arrived with the particular cruelty of bright Pacific Northwest sunlight after a night of poor decisions. Victoria was at her desk by 7 a.m., which was early even for her. Her assistant Maya had already arranged 3 media inquiries about the gala, a board memo about the Q4 projections, and a very carefully worded text from Daniel that said, Missed you last night. Hope you got home okay. Not where did you go. Not I was worried. Not even I'm sorry. I was standing at that bar with that woman like you were a coat check ticket. Just, hope you got home okay. She set the phone face down on her desk. She pulled up her call log. Ethan W., 11:47 p.m. Duration, 3 minutes 12 seconds. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she did something that the Victoria Sterling of 6 months ago would have found baffling. She opened a search tab on her personal laptop, not her work computer, not anything connected to the company's server, and typed in the phone number. Nothing. She sat back. She looked at the name again. Ethan W. There was a last name attached to the contact, but it had been entered with only a first initial for some reason, and she had absolutely no memory of when or how it had been added. She checked with Maya, who confirmed that she had not added the contact. She checked with her personal assistant before Maya. She scrolled back through 18 months of emails. Nothing. It was apparently a mystery. She told herself she was going to let it go. She didn't let it go. By 11 a.m., she had cross-referenced the number against a city directory, a business database. She technically wasn't supposed to access without a legal request and a utility company contact list that her chief of security occasionally used for background checks. By noon, she had a name. Ethan Walker. He worked for Seattle Metro Transit. Night shift maintenance. He had worked there for 7 years. Before that, he had served 2 tours in the Army and come home with a medal and a bad shoulder. He was 41 years old. He lived in the Rainier Valley neighborhood in a house that had been purchased 8 years ago with a VA loan. He had been married once. His wife, Claire Walker, had died of an aggressive cancer 5 years ago. He had a daughter named Sophie. She was 10. Victoria sat back in her chair and looked at what she had just done. She had spent 3 hours investigating a stranger she had accidentally called and immediately hung up on. She was the CEO of a billion-dollar company. She had 40 meetings scheduled between now and the end of the month. She had a fiancé or something like a fiancé. She had, as Maya had reminded her twice this morning, a full life. She picked up her phone and stared at the name. Ethan W. Then she did something that surprised even herself. She called him again. It rang 4 times. She was already composing an apology for leaving a voicemail when the line clicked. Yeah. One word, slightly rough around the edges. A man who had been asleep. Mr. Walker, she said. My name is Victoria Sterling. I called you by mistake last night. I wanted to apologize properly. A long pause. It's 8 in the morning. 11:30, she corrected. Almost noon. I work nights. She winced. I apologize. I can call back. What do you want, Ms. Sterling? Direct. No softening. No performative politeness. Just the question cleanly asked. She realized she didn't have an answer. You don't actually know, do you? He said. And again that quiet private amusement. Like he was watching something happen in slow motion and finding it gently interesting. I just wanted to apologize, she said firmly. For last night. It was unprofessional and, you don't have to be professional on a wrong number call. I'm always professional. That sounds exhausting. Victoria opened her mouth, closed it. Then to her extreme embarrassment she laughed. A real laugh. Not the polished, resonant laugh she deployed at events and interviews. A short, involuntary burst of something that came from somewhere she didn't entirely recognize. The line was quiet for a moment. You said something pretty strange last night, Ethan said. I know. You want to tell me why? Absolutely not. Okay. She almost said goodbye. She was on the edge of it, the professional, graceful exit. And then she heard something in the background on his end again. A small voice. High-pitched, urgent, the unmistakable cadence of a 10-year-old who had information that could not wait. Dad, we're out of orange juice and Sophie says, the voice began. Sophie says we're out of orange juice, Ethan said dryly, apparently to Victoria. Give me 1 second. There was shuffling, muffled words. Then a different voice. Sophie's close to the phone. Who are you talking to? Someone who called the wrong number, Ethan said. Is she still on the phone? Apparently. Victoria was smiling. She didn't know when that had started. Tell her hi, Sophie said. There was a pause. Then, with the particular reluctance of a man who knows he's going to do the thing anyway, my daughter says hi. Hi, Sophie, Victoria said. A delighted shriek on the other end quickly muffled. She's embarrassing, Ethan said. He didn't sound annoyed. He sounded like a man who had long since made peace with being embarrassed by someone he loved more than his own dignity. Victoria sat with that for a moment. Mr. Walker, she said, I don't suppose you drink coffee. Everyone drinks coffee. I'd like to buy you one, as an actual apology, in person. The silence this time was different, careful. Why? He asked. Because, she said, and this was the most honest thing she had said to another human being in a very long time. I think you're the only person I've spoken to in 6 months who talked to me like I was a regular person, and I'd like to experience that again before I completely forget what it feels like. Nothing, for so long that she thought he'd hung up. Then, Saturday, 9 a.m., Rainier Coffee on MLK. I can give you 45 minutes. That's fine. Don't be late. I've got Sophie's soccer game at 10:30. I won't be late. Okay. Another pause. And then just before the line closed, Ms. Sterling. Yes. Next time you want to propose to somebody, maybe make sure you know their name first. The line went dead, and Victoria Sterling sat in her 42nd floor office, surrounded by glass and power and every marker of a successful life. And she laughed again. Really laughed. The kind that you feel in your ribs. It was the best she had felt in months. She didn't know yet what was coming. Neither of them did. But somewhere across the city, in a house in Rainier Valley, a man who asked nothing of anyone was about to matter more to her than everything she had ever built. And a little girl with a soccer game at 10:30 was about to become the reason she finally understood what she had been missing. Saturday arrived the way important days sometimes do, quietly without announcement, as if the universe had decided not to tip its hand. Victoria was at Rainier Coffee at 8:53. She had told herself she wouldn't arrive early. She had arrived early. She had also told herself she wouldn't overthink what to wear, and had subsequently changed clothes 4 times before settling on dark jeans and a cream-colored blouse that Maya would have described as business casual, and that Victoria privately knew was the most non-CEO thing she owned that still fit properly. She ordered a black coffee and sat at a corner table, and told herself she was simply being a professional person, fulfilling a social obligation. Ethan walked in at 9 exactly. She recognized him, not because she'd seen a photo. The city directory photo had been terrible, barely more than a shadow, but because of the way he moved. Unhurried. Not slow, not careless, but unhurried in the way of someone who had decided a long time ago that rushing was a negotiation with panic, and he wasn't interested in that negotiation. He was tall, broad across the shoulders. He had the kind of face that had clearly been through weather, not just weather, but life. Weather, the particular erosion that comes from carrying things alone for a long time. He was wearing a flannel shirt and jeans and work boots, and he looked absolutely comfortable in all of it. He spotted her, walked over, did not smile immediately, which she respected. Ms. Sterling, he said. Victoria, she said. Please. He looked at her for a moment, not appraising, just looking the way you look when you're deciding whether something is what it says it is. Then he sat down. You're earlier than I expected, he said. I'm always early. That sounds like something someone says when they mean they can't stop being in control long enough to be on time. She stared at him. He flagged down the server and ordered a coffee, plain, no additions. Then he looked back at her with the same unreadable expression and said, Sorry, that was blunt. It was accurate, she said, before she could decide not to admit it. Something shifted in his face then. Not warmth exactly. More like the recognition of something unexpected. The first 10 minutes were careful, polite. She apologized again properly this time for the call. He accepted it without ceremony, which she appreciated, because most people in her life treated her apologies like rare events to be commemorated. He told her a little about the night shift, that he preferred it, that the buses didn't argue back, that there was a particular satisfaction in fixing something with your hands and knowing exactly when it was done. She told him almost nothing about herself, which was strange because usually she couldn't get through a cup of coffee without the conversation orbiting her company. He didn't ask. He did not ask. You're not curious, she finally said. About what? About who I am. What I do. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. I know who you are. Sophie looked you up after you called. Victoria felt something shift in her chest. And, and she spent the rest of the day asking me if rich people actually have butlers. He paused. I told her I didn't know. She seemed disappointed. I don't have a butler, Victoria said. I'll tell her. She'll still be disappointed. Victoria looked at him. You really don't care, do you? It wasn't quite a question. He looked back at her steadily. About what you're worth, no. Should I? Most people do. Most people, he said simply, are looking for something. The sentence landed quietly and stayed there between them. Victoria thought about Daniel's smile at the bar. She thought about the board members who called her Vic at dinner and Ms. Sterling in writing. She thought about the award, sitting on her kitchen counter, that she hadn't moved yet because she hadn't decided how she felt about it. What are you looking for? She asked. He considered that with the same unhurried patience he seemed to apply to everything. Right now, orange juice. We keep running out. He said it so flatly that she laughed before she saw it coming. There it was again. That unguarded laugh somewhere in her ribcage catching her off guard. He watched her laugh with the expression of someone who was filing something away without announcing it. Sophie's going to ask if you're coming to her game, he said when the laughter settled. I wasn't invited. You're invited now. He said it simply, no fanfare, no performance. The way you say something when you've already decided and you're simply informing the other party. You don't have to, but she'll ask. Victoria Sterling, who had meetings with senators and did not flinch, felt suddenly uncertain. I don't know anything about soccer. Sophie doesn't either, Ethan said. She just likes running. So she went. She had not been to a children's soccer game in her adult life. She sat in folding bleachers with a takeout coffee and watched 10-year-olds chase a ball with the passionate disorganization of a small hurricane. And Sophie, who was number 7, who ran like she had somewhere absolutely critical to be waved at her from the field with both arms like they were old friends. Victoria waved back. It was not professional. It was not strategic. It was completely involuntary, and it made her feel like she'd won something. Ethan sat beside her and said nothing for long stretches, which was something Victoria had never experienced next to another adult without finding it unbearable. She found it inexplicably like breathing room. She's fast, Victoria said. She's been fast since she could walk. Claire used to say she came out running. He said the name quietly. No fracture in his voice, but a carefulness the way you carry something fragile without showing the effort. Claire was your wife, Victoria said. Yeah. I'm sorry. 5 years, he said. You learn to carry it different. Doesn't get lighter. Just you get stronger, I guess. Or you build calluses. I'm not sure which. Victoria looked at her hands around her coffee cup. I don't think I've ever loved someone the way you're describing. She hadn't meant to say that out loud. He turned to look at her. I mean, she started. No, he said. That was an honest thing to say. Don't walk it back. She pressed her lips together. On the field, Sophie scored a goal entirely by accident, the ball ricocheting off her knee, and she screamed with a joy so complete and unself-conscious that several parents around them started laughing. Ethan put 2 fingers in his mouth and whistled sharp and loud, and Sophie found him immediately in the bleachers and pointed at him like he was the whole audience. Victoria watched this small private exchange between a father and daughter and felt something in her chest that she didn't have a name for. Something old. Something she thought she might have given up on. She came back the next Saturday. She told herself it was because Sophie had texted her from Ethan's phone, with his evident but resigned permission, to say that the team was playing again, and that her dad had said she could invite people if she wanted. Victoria came because it seemed rude not to. That was what she told herself. Then she came back the Saturday after that, and coffee before the game became coffee and breakfast. And Ethan started asking her questions, not about her company, not about her wealth, but actual questions. What did she want to do when she was 12? What was the last book she read that she didn't finish? What was she afraid of? The questions were so direct and so disinterested in performance that she kept answering them truthfully before she realized she'd decided to. Failure, she said one morning when he asked what she was afraid of. Specific failure, he asked. Or the concept, both. She turned her coffee cup on the table. I've spent my entire adult life making sure that I am never in a position where someone can look at me and say she wasn't enough. And the problem is, she stopped. The problem is, he said quietly, that it's never enough, so you keep going. She looked up at him. Yeah, she said. He nodded slowly, like he'd heard that before. Like maybe he'd lived inside a version of it himself. Ethan, she said, can I ask you something? You ask me things constantly. I mean something you might not want to answer. He leaned back slightly. Go ahead. After Claire, how long did it take before you let someone sit at your table metaphorically, not literally? She gestured at the table between them. This. How long before you let someone in? A long quiet. Sophie was in the corner of the coffee shop doing homework with headphones on one leg, swinging under the chair, completely absorbed in whatever 10-year-olds are absorbed in. Ethan watched her for a moment before he answered. I haven't, he said, until pretty recently. Victoria held very still. You're not easy to keep at a distance, he said. Not as a compliment, as a fact. Stated with the same directness he applied to everything, which made it land harder than any compliment she had been given in years. You show up. Every time you say you're going to show up, you show up. That matters more than most people think it does. Victoria swallowed, and then her phone rang. It was Daniel. She looked at the screen. She looked at Ethan. She rejected the call, put the phone face down on the table and said, Tell me about Claire. If you want to, you don't have to. I was quiet for a moment. Then he talked. He talked about a woman who had laughed too loudly in movie theaters and made elaborate pancake shapes on Sunday mornings and argued passionately about the correct way to load a dishwasher, and who had in the last weeks of her life made him promise not to disappear into grief. Made him swear on Sophie's life that he would keep showing up, that he would stay present, that he would let himself eventually be a whole person again. Have you kept that promise? Victoria asked softly. He looked at her for a long time. I'm working on it, he said. She nodded, and that was the morning. Though neither of them said it out loud, that something between them crossed a line it could not uncross. 3 weeks later, Victoria ended her engagement to Daniel. She did it calmly in his apartment with no dramatics. She told him that she thought they had been performing a relationship rather than living one, and that she didn't think either of them deserved that. He took it the way she expected, with restrained dignity and a slight relief that he tried to his credit to conceal. He said he hoped she found what she was looking for. She told him she thought she already knew what it was. She didn't tell him who. She wasn't ready to say it out loud. But 2 days after that conversation, she showed up at the coffee shop, and Ethan looked at her hand. The hand that had worn a ring, and then back at her face. He didn't ask. She didn't explain. He just slid a coffee across the table and said, Sophie's team won Thursday. She has a trophy she wants to show you. I want to see it, Victoria said. And she meant it. She genuinely, deeply meant it. Sophie came careening out of nowhere with a small plastic trophy and an explanatory speech that lasted 11 minutes and covered the entire game in unnecessary detail. And Victoria listened to every single word, and Ethan sat across from them both, with his hands wrapped around his cup and the expression of a man watching something he had been careful not to want. He was failing at not wanting it. She could see it. She didn't say anything. She understood completely. Because so was she. And then, one afternoon, a regular Tuesday, no occasion, no ceremony. Victoria stopped by the house because Sophie had called her about a school project involving famous entrepreneurs and had questions. Victoria helped with the project. Ethan made dinner. It was chicken and rice, straightforward, and good, the kind of meal that came from someone who cooked for love rather than impression. They ate at the kitchen table, the three of them. Sophie talking, Ethan occasionally redirecting, Victoria answering questions, and passing the salt, and being for the span of approximately 45 minutes a person who belonged somewhere. She drove home in silence that night. She sat in her parking garage for a long time before she went inside. She picked up her phone and texted Ethan. Thank you for dinner. His response came quickly, which was unlike him. He usually responded slowly, deliberately, like he thought before he wrote, which she had come to recognize as simply how he did things. Sophie asked me if you were going to be around more. She stared at the text. Her heart did something complicated. What did you tell her? She typed. The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. I told her I didn't know, that it wasn't up to just me. Victoria sat in the dark of her parking garage and read those words 4 times. Then she typed, for what it's worth, I'd like to be. The response this time was immediate. Yeah. 1 word. From a man who didn't waste them. It was the best text message she had ever received. She went upstairs to her empty penthouse and stood at the window looking out at the city and thought about a kitchen table and a plastic soccer trophy and chicken and rice and understood clearly, perhaps for the first time, exactly what it was that she had been missing. It wasn't love exactly. Not yet. It was something that came before love, something that love could only grow from. She had been missing someone who saw her, not her title, not her net worth, not the award on her kitchen counter, or the magazine covers, or the quarterly projections. Her. Ethan Walker, a man who fixed buses at midnight and raised his daughter alone, and said what he meant, and meant what he said, had seen her in 3 minutes on a wrong number call when no one else had managed it in 38 years. She had no idea what to do with that. She had no idea what was coming. But across the city, in a house in Rainier Valley, a 10-year-old was telling her father that she liked Victoria, and that she thought Victoria was real, and that real was her new favorite thing for a person to be. Ethan turned off Sophie's light and stood in the hallway for a while in the dark. He was afraid. Not of Victoria, not of what she was, of what he was starting to feel like when she wasn't there. That was the thing about letting someone in, he knew. That was the thing Claire had tried to warn him about from the beginning, when she was still well enough to tease him about his tendency to love quietly and late and completely. When you fall, she had told him once, you don't even realize it until you're already on the ground. He stood in the hallway. He thought about a woman in a parking garage texting him at 11 at night. He thought about her laughing at the soccer game. The way she had looked at Sophie. The way she had answered every question about the school project without once checking her phone. He pressed his back against the wall. He was already on the ground. He just hadn't admitted it yet. It started with a photograph. Not a damaging photograph. Not even a particularly interesting one. Just a photo taken by someone with a phone outside Rainier Coffee on a Saturday morning. Victoria Sterling in jeans and a cream blouse, laughing at something. And beside her, a tall man in a flannel shirt, who was not looking at the camera, because he never looked at cameras, had no reason to, had spent his entire adult life being a person that cameras had no interest in. Until now. The photo was posted to a gossip account with a following of 200,000 people, and a caption that read, CEO Victoria Sterling, spotted with mystery man in Seattle, who is he? By noon, it had 40,000 likes. By evening, someone had identified Ethan Walker. By the following morning, his name, his employer, his address, and the fact that he worked the night shift repairing city buses had been assembled and published by 3 separate media outlets. Billionaire CEO's secret romance with bus mechanic. Victoria saw the headline at 6 a.m. from her kitchen counter and felt her stomach drop straight through the floor. She called Ethan immediately. He picked up on the second ring, which told her he'd already seen it. Ethan. I saw it, he said. His voice was flat, not angry. Flat in the way of someone pressing down on something that would hurt more if he let it up. I'm going to call my PR team. We can get ahead of this. I can put out a statement that, Victoria. He said her name once quietly, and she stopped. Sophie's school called. A parent took screenshots and sent them to the school group chat. Sophie found out from a classmate. The silence that followed was the worst kind. The kind where you understand the exact weight of what you've just been told, and there is nothing adequate to say. Is she okay? Victoria asked. She's 10, he said. She found out her dad is in the news from a kid who probably heard it from his parents over breakfast. No, she's not okay. Victoria pressed her hand flat against her counter. I'm coming over. No, he said. Firm, immediate. Ethan. Not right now. Give her today. Give me today. A pause. Please. She stood in her kitchen and felt completely, utterly powerless for the first time since she was a girl with nothing and no one, and a promise to herself that she would never feel this way again. She had built an empire specifically so that she would never feel this way again. And here it was anyway, walking through the front door like it owned the place. "Okay," she said. "Okay. But I need you to know that whatever they write, whatever anyone says, I'm not embarrassed. I want to be very clear about that." Another pause. "I know," he said. And then the line closed. By mid-morning, the story had metastasized. Entertainment blogs, business journals, social media, a morning talk show segment asking whether Victoria Sterling's romantic choices reflected poor judgment in her personal life and whether that indicated poor judgment in her professional life. An anonymous investor forum thread titled, "Should We Be Concerned?" It had 400 replies before lunch. Victoria sat in her office and read every single one of them. Her communications director, a sharp woman named Patricia, who had worked for 3 senators before coming to Sterling Technologies, came in and closed the door and laid out 3 strategic options for managing the narrative. Victoria listened carefully, agreed to 2 of them, rejected the third, which involved a carefully worded implication that she and Ethan were just friends exploring a connection. She would not do that. "If I say we're just friends, I'm lying," she told Patricia. "I don't lie in public statements." Patricia looked at her carefully. "Victoria, the board. The board can express their concerns in the next scheduled meeting, which is in 12 days. She turned back to her laptop. "In the meantime, I'd like a full analysis of who leaked Ethan's personal information to the press. Name employer, which outlet paid them, and how much." Patricia blinked. That's not usually our..." "It is now." She looked up. "Someone built a profile on a private citizen in 48 hours. I want to know who helped them." Patricia left without arguing. She'd worked for senators. She recognized a person who had made a decision. What Victoria didn't know yet, what no one in her office knew yet, was that the leak had not come from a random gossip account or an opportunistic paparazzo. It had been arranged. Precisely deliberately arranged by a man who sat 2 floors below her office and who had been waiting for exactly this kind of opening. Marcus Kane had been COO of Sterling Technologies for 4 years. He was excellent at his job, which was part of what made him dangerous, because excellent people who want things they can't have will find very creative ways to reach for them. Marcus had been watching Victoria for 2 years. Not with romantic interest. With the particular cold attention of someone calculating the distance between where they stood and where they wanted to be. He had looked at the board. He had looked at the investors. He had looked at every structural weakness in the company's leadership, and he had concluded that Victoria Sterling's greatest vulnerability was not her strategy or her balance sheet. It was her reputation, her credibility. The carefully maintained image of a woman whose personal life was as controlled and impeccable as her quarterly results. A bus mechanic, he had decided the moment he saw that photograph, was the crack in the wall. He had not personally leaked anything. He was far too careful for that. What he had done was make a single phone call to a former colleague at a financial communications firm who had made a call to a contact at a media analytics company who had connected with a freelance journalist who specialized in what the industry called profile aggregation. The whole chain had taken 48 hours and left no fingerprints that pointed anywhere near Marcus Kane. He sat in his office and watched the headlines multiply and felt nothing except a quiet, organized satisfaction. He did not know that he had made one mistake. He didn't know that the freelance journalist he'd ultimately paid had a paper trail. But that came later. What came first was worse. Ethan called her 4 days after the headlines broke on a Thursday evening and said, "I need to talk to you. Can you come by?" She was there in 20 minutes. Sophie was already in bed. The house was quiet in the way that houses get when something heavy is sitting in them, and everyone is being careful not to touch it. Ethan made coffee. He always made coffee. It was his version of centering himself, and they sat at the kitchen table, and he put both hands flat on the surface and looked at her. "2 things happened today," he said. "Tell me." "First, someone slid a note under the door of the maintenance bay at work, printed, Anonymous, said that I was with you for the money and that my coworkers should know what kind of man they were working with. He said it evenly, but his jaw was tight. Some of the guys have seen it. Most of them don't believe it. But some of them... He stopped. It's different when it's where you work. It's different when it's the people you see every day. Victoria felt rage move through her like cold water. I'm going to find out who... Victoria. He said her name the same way he always did when he wanted her to slow down. Not harshly, just certain. Let me finish. She waited. Second thing. He looked at the table, then back at her. Sophie got into it with a girl at school today. A girl whose mother apparently had opinions. The girl told Sophie that her dad was only talking to you because you were rich, that he was using you. He paused. Sophie punched her. Victoria's mouth fell open. She's suspended for 2 days, Ethan said. Which she absolutely deserves. We talked about it. She understands that. He exhaled. But she was crying when she told me. Not because she was in trouble. Because she said she didn't know what to believe anymore. She said everyone at school was saying things, and she didn't know what was true. The words hit Victoria like something physical. Ethan, she knows the truth. She knows us. She's 10, he said. She knows what she knows, but she's surrounded by noise right now, and noise is loud when you're 10, and I can't. He stopped, pressed his lips together, and for the first time since she had known him, she saw the careful composure crack just slightly at the edges. I can't have her in the middle of this. I won't. I know, Victoria said. I know. Tell me what you need. He was quiet for a long time. I need to ask you something, he said finally. And I need you to answer it honestly. Always. He looked at her steadily. Is this worth it to you? Not the headline. Not the noise. This. He gestured between them. You and me. A bus mechanic and a CEO sitting at a kitchen table. Is this actually what you want, or is this... He paused, and she heard something careful in the pause, something that cost him. Or is this you chasing something that felt different? Something that felt real because everything else in your life felt fake. It was the most brutally honest question anyone had ever asked her. She didn't look away. It started that way, she said. I won't lie to you. In the beginning, yes, you were different. You were the first person in years who talked to me like I was just a person, and I was drawn to that. But Ethan... She put her hand on the table between them, not quite touching his. That was 6 months ago. What I feel right now is not about what you're not. It's about who you are, specifically. Just you. He looked at her hand. He looked at her face, and she watched him make a decision she could not read. Okay, he said. Just okay. She had learned by now what okay meant from him. It meant I believe you. It meant I'm still here. It meant more in 2 syllables than most people managed in paragraphs. But then 2 weeks later the second wave hit. And it was worse. Someone had sourced old photographs from Ethan's army years. They had been manipulated subtly, professionally. Manipulated the kind of alteration that required software and intention to place him in contexts that suggested a pattern of behavior that did not exist. The images appeared on 2 major platforms simultaneously, which was not a coincidence, and were accompanied by an anonymous claim from a source close to the situation that Ethan Walker had a history of targeting wealthy women. It was completely fabricated. Victoria knew it was fabricated because she knew Ethan Walker. She knew how he operated. She knew that this was a man who had refused twice to let her pay for his coffee. A man who had never once asked her anything about her company, or her assets, or her investments. A man who had, when she'd once casually offered to help Sophie with school supplies, looked at her with such quiet, clear dignity and said, "We're fine, but thank you," and meant both things completely. She put Patricia on the photos within the hour. She got her legal team on the platform hosts. She started pulling at every thread she could find. But the damage moved faster than the correction. Always does. The board called an emergency meeting. Victoria sat at the head of the table and listened to 6 people she had hired and respected express concerns about perception and liability, and whether her personal choices were creating an environment of instability. She listened to all of it, with the particular stillness she had learned in boardrooms. The stillness that meant I am processing everything you are saying, and you cannot read my face. Then she said, I am not ending a relationship because it makes you uncomfortable. If you have concerns about the company's direction, I invite you to bring them to the next scheduled. Marcus has prepared some alternative governance proposals, one of the board members said. Victoria went very still. She turned her head slowly toward the far end of the table, where Marcus Kane was sitting with a folder in front of him and an expression of practiced concern on his face. Has he? She said. Just contingency planning, Marcus said smoothly. Given the climate. She looked at him. He looked back. And in that moment, in the air between them across the length of a boardroom table, something shifted. She couldn't name what she saw in his face, but she filed it, carefully, completely. Thank you, Marcus, she said. We'll table that for now. She went home that night and stood at her window for a long time. Then she called Ethan. He picked up on the first ring. How are you? She asked. Tired, he said. Sophie's okay. We watched a movie. She fell asleep on the couch. Good. She pressed her forehead against the glass. Ethan, someone is behind this. This isn't organic media attention. The photos were manipulated. The timing is too precise. Someone is running this. A pause. I know, he said. You know. I've thought about it for a while. His voice was careful. I don't know who. But yeah. This doesn't feel random. She closed her eyes. I'm going to find out, she said. Victoria. The way he said her name had a weight to it, now a different weight than before. Be careful. Whoever this is, they're inside your world, not mine. She opened her eyes. I know, she said. And she did know. She had known it since the boardroom. Since Marcus's folder, and his practiced expression, and his perfectly timed contingency plans. She just didn't have proof yet. What she didn't know was that Ethan 3 days later would make a decision without telling her. A decision made entirely out of love. The kind of love that doesn't announce itself, but simply acts quietly and at great personal cost. A decision that would break something between them before it had the chance to become everything it was supposed to be. He would end it. Without warning. Without negotiation. Without giving her the chance to fight for it. And Victoria Sterling, who had negotiated billion-dollar contracts and restructured failing companies and stood unmoved in boardrooms while people tried to dismantle her, would find herself completely unable to negotiate the only thing she had ever truly wanted to keep. The woman who had built everything discovered in the worst possible way that there are things no amount of power can hold together when someone has decided to let go. He called her on a Sunday morning. No preamble. No warning text the night before. Just her phone ringing at 7:45 a.m. and his name on the screen. And she answered it the way she always answered when it was him, immediately, without the professional pause she gave everyone else. Ethan. Can you come by? His voice was wrong. Not cold, not angry, just resolved. The way a voice gets when someone has spent a long night arriving at a decision and is now on the other side of it. She was there in 18 minutes. Sophie wasn't home. He'd sent her to a neighbor's, a detail Victoria noticed immediately because Ethan never sent Sophie away when Victoria visited. Sophie was always the easy buffer, the motion between them that made the silences comfortable. Without her, the house had a different quality. Still. Waiting. Ethan was standing in the kitchen when she came in. Not sitting. Standing, arms crossed, and he looked at her with the expression of someone who had rehearsed what they were going to say and was now trying to remember whether it was right. Tell me, she said. He uncrossed his arms, put his hands flat on the counter behind him. I've been thinking about this for 2 weeks. About what? About us. About Sophie. About what this is doing to both of you. He looked at the floor, then back at her. 3 days ago, a reporter knocked on my neighbor's door. Mrs. Harada is 72 years old, and she watches Sophie sometimes after school. She was shaking when she called me. Shaking. Because a stranger knocked on her door and asked her questions about me and Sophie. Victoria's chest tightened. Ethan, I'm close to finding out who's... That's not the point, he said. The gentleness in his voice made it worse than if he'd shouted. Victoria, a 72-year-old woman who has never done anything except be kind to my daughter, is being dragged into this. Sophie came home Thursday and told me that she doesn't want to go to school anymore. She said she's tired of people looking at her. He stopped, steadied himself. She's 10. She should be tired of math homework, not this. Victoria understood what was coming. She understood it clearly, completely, the way you understand something you've been afraid of for a long time. Don't, she said. I have to. Ethan. I'm not doing this to hurt you. He said it straight, direct, the way he said everything. I'm doing this because Sophie comes first. She has always come first. That doesn't change for anyone. I know she comes first. I would never ask you to. You don't have to ask. He looked at her with something in his face that was close to unbearable. That's the problem. You're not asking for anything. You're just here. And being here is enough to turn both our lives into a headline. And I can't. He pressed his lips together. I can't give Sophie a father who is a punchline. I can't let what we have, whatever this is, cost her the one thing she's supposed to be able to count on, which is me. Steady, present, not a story. The room was very quiet. Victoria had negotiated with people who had lawyers present. She had stood in rooms where millions of dollars and years of work hung in the balance and kept her voice level. She could not keep her voice level right now. So that's it, she said. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. Don't. She stopped, pressed her hand against her sternum. Ethan, we are this close to finding out who is behind the manipulation. The photos were fabricated. The leaks were coordinated. This wasn't random media attention. This was done deliberately, and when we prove that, and while you're proving it, he said quietly, Sophie's still in school. Mrs. Harada's door still gets knocked on. My coworkers still read things about me. He shook his head. I believe you. I believe someone is behind it. But in the meantime, real people who had nothing to do with any of this are getting hurt. And I won't keep letting that happen. She looked at him. He looked back at her. Neither of them moved. You're the best man I have ever known, she said, and her voice broke on it cleanly right down the middle. Something moved across his face. Something he didn't name, and she didn't ask him to. Take care of yourself, he said. Please. She left. She drove back to her building and sat in the parking garage for 45 minutes without going inside. Then she went upstairs and stood at her window and watched the city exist without her in it, and understood what it meant to have everything and feel the specific weight of the one thing that wasn't there. She went to work Monday morning, Tuesday, every day that week. She was precise. She was strategic. She did not cry in the office, which was a rule she had always kept, and she kept it now through sheer structural will. But Maya noticed. Patricia noticed. People who had worked with her for years noticed the particular stillness that had settled over her, the way a machine runs perfectly, right up until the moment it stops. She didn't stop. She kept pulling threads. Patricia came to her on a Wednesday, 2 weeks after Ethan ended it with a name. Not a journalist, not a media contact, a financial communications firm, a specific partner at that firm. A man who had worked at Sterling Technologies 4 years ago briefly in a contractor capacity and who had a documented professional relationship with Marcus Kane. Victoria read the file Patricia handed her twice. Then she set it on the desk and looked up. How far back does it go? She asked. Further than the photos, Patricia said carefully. We started pulling financial records that are publicly adjacent. Marcus has been in contact with 2 board members we weren't aware of. There's a pattern of communication that dates back 8 months, before any of this started. 8 months. Before the photograph. Before the headlines. Before any of it. He was planning this, Victoria said. It looks that way. She sat with that for a long moment. Then she said, Get me the company's external auditors, not our usual team. I want someone who has never worked with Marcus or anyone connected to him, and I want them to start with the Q3 filings. Patricia looked at her carefully. What are you expecting to find? I don't know yet, Victoria said. But someone who is willing to run a coordinated media campaign to manipulate stock perception. She stopped. Said it plainly. Someone like that doesn't stop at personal attacks. Patricia left. Victoria turned back to the window. Then she picked up her phone and looked at Ethan's name for a long time. She put it back down. Not yet. She couldn't call him yet. Not with what she suspected. Not until she had something real to offer instead of another storm. The auditors found it in 11 days. The word that came back to her was not fraud exactly. It was more precise than fraud. It was a specific category of financial manipulation, a coordinated pattern of selective disclosure, combined with stock options that had been structured to benefit enormously from a particular kind of instability in the company's leadership. The kind of instability that would occur, for instance, if the CEO became publicly embroiled in a personal scandal that caused investor uncertainty. Marcus had built himself a position that would pay out massively if Victoria was removed or stepped back from operational control. He had then methodically tried to create the conditions that would trigger that removal. He had used Ethan to do it. He had used a man who fixed buses at midnight and raised his daughter alone and asked nothing from anyone, and he had tried to burn that man's reputation down to the ground as a mechanism for making money. Victoria read the auditor's report in full. She read it twice. Then she sat back in her chair and felt something in her chest that was past anger. Anger is hot. This was something colder and more complete. This was the feeling of understanding exactly how something works and knowing exactly what to do about it. She called the board chair directly. Not through channels. Directly. "I need an emergency meeting," she said. "Tomorrow morning. Every board member. And I need you to tell Marcus that I want him there too. Don't tell him why." The board chair paused. "Victoria, is this about?" "It's about the integrity of this company," she said. "Which I believe we both care about. Tomorrow, 8 a.m. She spent that night preparing. Not strategizing. Preparing. There was a difference she had learned a long time ago. Strategy is about what you want to achieve. Preparation is about making sure when the moment comes that you have everything you need to say the true thing clearly. She had everything she needed. The meeting room was full at 8 the next morning. 7 board members. Legal counsel. The external auditors present at her request. And Marcus Kane, who came in looking exactly the way a man looks when he doesn't know what he's walking into, but has decided the safest posture is relaxed confidence. He sat down. He nodded at Victoria. Professional. Practiced. She waited until everyone was seated. Then she said, "I'm going to save us some time. Marcus, I know what you did." The room went very still. Marcus's expression didn't change. "Victoria, I'm not sure what you..." The communications firm, the freelance journalist, the fabricated photographs, the coordinated leak of Ethan Walker's personal information. She said each item calmly, the way you read items off a list when the list is accurate and you have documentation. And underneath all of it, the stock position that was structured to benefit from my removal as CEO, combined with a pattern of selective disclosure that your audit trail makes very clear. Silence. Absolute silence. One of the board members said very quietly, "Marcus." Marcus Kane sat perfectly still for 4 seconds. She counted. Then he said, "These are serious allegations. I'd want to see whatever supposed evidence." "It's already with the SEC," Victoria said. "As of 6:30 this morning." That was the moment his composure cracked. Just slightly. Just at the edges. The particular micro-expression of a man who has just realized that the door he planned to exit through is no longer there. The board removed him within the hour. Unanimously. Formally. With the particular efficient decisiveness of people who have just understood that they were being used as much as anyone else. Marcus was walked out of the building by security. Victoria watched it from her office window. She felt no satisfaction. Only a tired, clean sense of completion, the way you feel when something that was broken for a long time has finally been taken apart. But then something happened that she did not plan for. The journalists, who had originally run the damaging stories about Ethan, 3 of them from different outlets, began independently investigating their own sources. Because that is what good journalists do when they realize they've been fed a fabricated narrative. They burn it down themselves before someone else does. They dug into Ethan Walker expecting to find the confirmation of what they'd been told. What they found instead was the complete opposite of what they'd been told. What they found was Ethan Walker. Not the invented version, the real one. For 7 years quietly, and without announcement, he had volunteered every second Sunday at a veterans shelter 4 blocks from his house. He had helped 3 families in his neighborhood avoid eviction by connecting them with resources he spent his own time researching. He had paid the hospital bill of a coworker whose insurance had denied a claim, written the check himself, told no one, asked for nothing in return. The coworker had mentioned it once privately to a friend who mentioned it in passing to one of the journalists, who was now pulling the whole story apart. There were more. Small acts, private acts, the kind of acts that a man does when he believes that doing right has nothing to do with being witnessed. The stories ran within a week of Marcus's removal. Not tabloid stories. Real ones. Long, careful, reported pieces. The kind that take time and require sources who speak on record. The public narrative changed so fast it was almost disorienting. Victoria read one of the articles sitting at her kitchen counter at midnight. She read it all the way through. Then she set her phone down and pressed both hands flat on the counter and breathed. Because she already knew all of this. She had known who Ethan Walker was for months. She had known it from the soccer game and the kitchen table and the honest questions and the coffee he always made without asking if you wanted some. She had known it from the way he talked about Claire, and the way he said Sophie's name, and the way he had ended their relationship to protect people he loved, even though it cost him something too. She had known. But the world was just now catching up. The next morning she got a text from an unsaved number. It took her a moment to realize it was Sophie on Sophie's own phone, which was apparently new, a birthday present she'd been given the week before. My dad read the articles, the text said. He didn't say anything, but I heard him on the phone with Grandma, and I think he was crying a little. He never cries. I thought you should know. Victoria stood in her kitchen and read that text 3 times. Then also, we're out of orange juice again. He says he doesn't care, but he does. She put her phone down. She pressed her fingers to her mouth, and she started to think, not strategically. Not with the part of her brain that ran a company, or navigated boards, or constructed arguments. With the part that had been in the back of a limousine on a rainy night in Seattle, exhausted and a little drunk, and so fundamentally lonely that she had accidentally proposed to a stranger, and the stranger had been kind. She had spent 6 months learning what it meant to be seen, really seen, by a man who didn't want anything from her except the truth of who she was. She had spent 2 months learning what it felt like to lose that. Not because he stopped caring. Because he cared too much about the wrong things to let himself keep it. She had built her entire life on the belief that if you worked hard enough and were strong enough and strategic enough, you could get what you needed. What she had never accounted for was the possibility that what she needed most could not be built, could not be negotiated, could not be acquired. It could only be chosen, and she was going to choose it, loudly, publicly, without strategy and without safety net, and without the polished presentation that had served as her armor for 38 years. She picked up her phone. She did not call him. Not yet. Because what she was about to do required more than a phone call. It required a moment as accidental and honest and terrifying as the one that had started all of this, a woman in the back of a limousine saying the true thing before she could stop herself. She was going to say the true thing again. This time, she was going to mean it all the way down. She planned it for 3 weeks, not the speech. The speech she didn't plan at all because she knew herself well enough by now to understand that the moment she scripted it, it would become a performance, and she was done performing. What she planned was the logistics, the venue, the timing, the one phone call she needed to make to a person who was not Ethan and who would either help her or think she had completely lost her mind. She called Sophie, not Ethan's phone. Sophie's phone. The new one with the birthday case that had a small crack in the corner already, because Sophie was 10 and 10-year-olds crack things. Sophie picked up on the first ring. "I knew you were going to call," she said immediately, with the absolute unfounded certainty of a child who has decided she is perceptive. "Did you?" Victoria said. "Dad's been weird for 3 weeks, like quiet weird, not sad weird, more like..." Sophie paused, searching for the word, with the seriousness of someone for whom words still feel newly discovered. Like waiting weird. Like when you know something's going to happen, and you keep not saying it. Victoria sat with that for a moment. Sophie, she said, I need your help with something, and I need you to keep it between us for a little while. A pause so short it barely existed. Okay, I'm serious, not a word to your dad. I can keep secrets, Sophie said with such immediate and confident dignity that Victoria believed her completely. The Lighthouse Foundation Gala, Victoria said. It's in 3 weeks. It's a charity event. Your dad will have seen it in the news. It's fairly large. I need to know if he's working that Saturday night. She heard Sophie's thinking silence. Then, he switched his Saturday shift last week. I heard him on the phone with his supervisor. He does that sometimes when he has stuff going on. Good, Victoria said. Here's what I need you to do, she told her. Sophie listened without interrupting, which Victoria had learned was not Sophie's natural state, and therefore indicated serious engagement. When Victoria finished, Sophie was quiet for 4 full seconds. Then she said, That's kind of crazy. I know. Dad's going to freak out. I know. He doesn't like big things. He doesn't like when people look at him. I know that too. Another pause, then quieter. Are you sure? Like, are you actually sure? Because he's going to say yes if you do it that way, and then you guys are going to be, you know. And I just... Her voice shifted into something younger and more careful. I don't want him to get hurt again. He tries really hard to act like he's fine, but he's not always fine. Victoria felt her throat tighten. I know he's not always fine, she said gently. And I know you protect him. That's one of the bravest things I've ever seen anyone do. She paused. But Sophie, I'm not going to hurt him. I promise you that. The way I can promise you that is because I am absolutely, completely sure. A long silence. Then Sophie said, Okay, I'm in. But you have to get us floor seats because I've never been to anything like that, and I want to actually see. Victoria laughed, genuinely rib deep the way she only ever laughed around these two people. Done. And you have to wear something nice, not like work nice, actually nice. I'll do my best. I'm going to tell you what to wear, Sophie said firmly. I'll text you. She texted her 40 minutes later with 4 very specific requirements and a reference photo that appeared to be from a magazine she'd found online. Victoria looked at it for a long moment, then texted back, Perfect. Because it was. The 3 weeks passed in a strange double-time fast in the office, where the post-Marcus cleanup required her full attention and long days, and the kind of organizational rebuilding that she was actually very good at, and slow everywhere else in the early mornings before work, and the late nights after, when the city was quiet, and she would think about a kitchen table, and a man who made coffee without asking, and a little girl with a soccer trophy, and a cracked phone case. She called Ethan once during those 3 weeks. Not about the gala. She called because Patricia had sent over the final confirmation of Marcus's SEC charges, and she wanted him to know, needed him to know that the thing that had been done to him had been named and documented and would be answered for. He answered on the 3rd ring. Victoria, I wanted to tell you myself, she said. Marcus Kane has been formally charged. Securities fraud, coordinated market manipulation, and a 3rd charge related to the fabricated media campaign. It's public record as of this morning. Silence. He used you, she said. He used you specifically as a mechanism to destabilize this company, and what he did to your reputation was part of a financial crime. I wanted you to know that it wasn't random, and it wasn't true, and the record is going to reflect that. She heard him breathe. Ethan. Yeah, he said, low and rough around the edges. I heard you. How are you? I've been better. A pause. Then honestly, I've been worse too. How's Sophie? She's... He stopped. And she heard something in the stop, a particular quality of hesitation, like someone who knows something they're not saying. She's good. She's been weirdly secretive lately, which usually means she's planning something. I've learned not to push it. Victoria pressed her lips together very hard. Tell her I said hi, she said. I will. Another pause. The longest one. Victoria, I'm glad you called. 3 words. But from him, they were not small. Me too, she said. And she let it be exactly what it was, no more and no less, and said goodbye, and sat in her office for a while afterward, with her hands flat on the desk, and her heart doing something complicated and entirely unstrategic. The night of the gala arrived on a Saturday in late October. The Lighthouse Foundation raised money for veterans' housing and family support services, which was one of the reasons Victoria had chosen it, and which she suspected if he ever found out, Ethan would either appreciate or find unbearably on the nose. She had been the event's lead sponsor for 2 years. She was expected to speak. She was always expected to speak. She arrived early. She always arrived early. Sophie had texted her at 4:30. You better be wearing it. Victoria had sent back a photo. Sophie had responded with 3 fire emojis and the word perfect in all capitals, which was the most affirming message Victoria had received in recent memory. The room filled. $1,000 tables. Donors and philanthropists and city officials and foundation partners. The kind of room Victoria had spent 20 years learning to move through with precision and ease. She moved through it tonight differently, not with less confidence, with a different kind of confidence, the kind that doesn't come from preparation. She checked her phone at 7:15. A text from Sophie, we're here. Section C. Dad thinks we're here because I told him the foundation does veteran stuff and he couldn't say no. He's wearing the blue shirt. I told him to. Victoria closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Then she put her phone away and walked to the stage. The program ran for 40 minutes before her segment. She sat through it with the outward composure of a woman completely at peace, and the inward experience of someone whose entire nervous system was running a completely different program. She had given hundreds of speeches. She had never given this one. When she was introduced, she walked to the podium to the kind of applause that she usually received at these events. Warm, respectful, the sound of people who knew her name and trusted her record. She looked out at the room. 1,500 people. Crystal and candlelight, and the particular hush of a room waiting to be told something worth hearing. She found Section C. Ethan was sitting straight in his chair, with the careful stillness of a man who is slightly uncomfortable in a formal setting, but is not going to let that show. The blue shirt. Sophie had done well. Sophie was sitting beside him, already looking at the stage, and when she spotted Victoria, she went very still in a way that was the opposite of her usual motion, the stillness of someone holding something delicate. Victoria gripped the sides of the podium. She looked at the room. And she began. A year ago, she said. I was sitting in the back of a limousine after an event like this one, and I was more alone than I have ever been in my life. I had built everything I was supposed to build. I had achieved everything that was supposed to matter. And I had never felt further from the things that actually do. The room was already quiet. It went quieter. I made a phone call that night, a wrong number, to a man I had never met who was working the night shift, repairing city buses, who had no idea who I was, and who, when I said something completely ridiculous, responded with the most quietly decent thing anyone has ever said to me. She paused. He said, "Ma'am, I think you called the wrong person." And he said it so calmly and so without judgment that I couldn't stop thinking about it for days. A ripple of laughter through the room. Warm recognizing. I tracked him down. Which in retrospect probably should have concerned him more than it did. And I told him I wanted to buy him coffee as an apology. And he gave me 45 minutes because his daughter had a soccer game. She looked up. That was almost a year ago. And in that time this man showed me something that no amount of success had managed to teach me. He showed me what it looks like to love people without conditions, to show up without agenda, to be genuinely in the most unfashionable possible way good. She stopped. She stepped back from the podium. The room watched her walk. She came down the 3 steps from the stage and moved through the tables, and people turned as she passed. The way. People turn when something is happening that wasn't on the program, when the planned thing has become the real thing, and everyone can feel the difference. She reached Section C. She stood in front of Ethan Walker, who had risen halfway from his chair, with the expression of a man who has just realized the thing that is happening and has not yet decided what to do with his face. Sophie grabbed his arm and held it. Victoria looked at him. Just him. In a room of 1,500 people, and she looked at only him, and the room fell away completely. "The first time I called you," she said, and her voice was steady because she was done being afraid. "I said you were the man I wanted to marry. I didn't know you. I didn't know your name or your face or the way you make coffee before anyone asks, or the way you whistle at soccer games, or the way you love your daughter, like it's the one thing in the world you're absolutely certain you're doing right." She breathed. "I know all of that now. And I meant it more now than I did then. More than I know how to say in a room this size." Ethan was completely still. Sophie was crying already silently, with the complete absence of self-consciousness of a child who has decided this is a crying moment and is not going to apologize for it. Victoria's voice dropped. Not quiet enough that the room couldn't hear. Quiet enough that it felt like only for him. "I'm not drunk this time," she said. "I'm not confused about whose number I dialed. I know exactly who you are. And I'm asking you in front of all these people and this foundation and whatever this evening was supposed to be before I made it into something entirely else." She let out a breath. "Will you let me try again? Not a proposal. Not yet. Just will you let me try again? Will you let us try again?" He looked at her for a long moment. Sophie made a sound beside him that was half sob and half the word Dad. He looked at Sophie. Sophie looked back at him with red eyes and an expression that said everything she was too emotional to articulate, which was, "I knew. I helped. Say yes. Please say yes." He looked back at Victoria, and then Ethan Walker, who said what he meant, and only what he meant, who had never in his life said a single word for performance or audience or anything except truth, smiled. Not the small, private, filed-away smile that she had come to recognize over months of coffee and kitchen tables. A full one. The kind she had not seen from him before. The kind that changed his whole face. "You're still embarrassing," he said. She laughed. The rib-deep kind. "Completely. You know I hate being looked at." "I know. I'll owe you for this indefinitely. Sophie helped you plan this." It was not a question. "She picked my outfit." He looked at Sophie, who had stopped pretending to be composed and was now simply crying and smiling at the same time, with zero apology. He shook his head slowly, with the expression of a man who has spent 10 years being outmaneuvered by someone half his size and has made his peace with it. Then he looked back at Victoria. "Yeah," he said. One word, 2 letters, the whole world in it. The room erupted. Not polite gala applause. Real sound. The sound of 1,500 people who came to donate money and ended up witnessing something true. Something that reminded them of what they'd wanted when they were younger and less careful. Something that costs nothing to witness and somehow still feels like a gift. Ethan stood the rest of the way up, and Sophie launched herself at both of them simultaneously with the force of a small missile. And Victoria caught her and held on, and Ethan put one arm around Sophie and one hand against the back of Victoria's head, and the three of them stood in the middle of a charity gala in Seattle while 1,500 people made noise around them, and it was the least professional moment of Victoria Sterling's entire career. It was also the best moment of her life, later, much later. After the event wound down, and Sophie had fallen asleep in the car, with her head against Ethan's shoulder, and Victoria was driving because Ethan had quietly handed her the keys without discussing it, which was the kind of thing he did. They sat in the driveway of the house in Rainier Valley and didn't go inside immediately. "I want to ask you something," Ethan said. "Anything. At the gala, when you walked off the stage." He looked at her in the dark of the car. "Were you scared?" She considered lying. Considered the version of herself that would say no. I was certain I knew exactly what I was doing. Then she thought about a man who had spent 11 months asking her honest questions and deserving honest answers. "Terrified," she said. "Completely terrified. My hands were shaking the whole walk across the room." He nodded slowly. "You didn't look it. I've had a lot of practice looking like I'm not terrified." "I know," he said. And then quieter, "So have I." She looked at him. "I was scared too," he said. "When you walked in that night. When I realized what was happening." He paused. "I've been scared since the day I met you, if I'm being honest. Because I knew. Pretty early on I knew that you were going to matter. And mattering is—" He searched for the word. Mattering is terrifying when you've already lost something that mattered. I know, she said softly. But Claire made me promise, he said, to keep showing up, to stay present, to let myself be a whole person again. He looked at Sophie asleep in the back seat, then back at Victoria. I think this is what that looks like. Victoria reached across the console and took his hand. He held it. They sat in the driveway for a while, the three of them, two awake and one asleep in the particular quiet of people who have found the place they were heading toward without knowing they were heading anywhere. 6 months later, Victoria Sterling stood at a different podium at a different kind of event and accepted a Community Leadership Award from the Lighthouse Foundation. She thanked them briefly and sincerely, and without performance. She mentioned in passing that she had recently become a stepmother to a young woman who had very strong opinions about outfit selection and who was without question the sharpest person in any room she entered. In the front row, Sophie sat up straighter. Ethan put his arm around his wife. His wife. The woman who had called the wrong number and found the right person. The man who had answered a stranger's call with quiet kindness and ended up with a family he hadn't known he was still allowed to want. The little girl who had looked at a billionaire CEO and seen something real and decided that real was her favorite thing for a person to be. Some love stories begin with grand gestures, with perfection and planning and the careful construction of a moment meant to last. This one began with a wrong number, a little too much champagne, and 8 words from a man who had no idea what he was walking into. "Ma'am, I think you called the wrong person." He was wrong about that. She had called exactly the right one.